Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. Um, I hope I'm not too loud. Last week I didn't realize when I started talking, I came in so hot that I know you had to turn it down a little bit, so I'm trying to make sure I'm adjusted good this week. Um, what I want to do today is do something that is, in one sense, a little bit complicated. Um, because I want to talk about our value. Um, what I mean by that is this: we are by the way, love and blessings to you, ABJ Jones. Um, we have always been an economic commodity in this country. I mean, that's what we were brought here for. And let me turn this damn thing off. So, um, in being a commodity, it means that since we weren't being dealt with as being human beings, we were being dealt with as things that had a monetary or an economic value. And so I wanted to look at some things in a very serious way that had to do with how we were treated as well as how we developed in that role. And it's very painful. It's very painful. The price for their pound of flesh, which is a book, but it talks about the value of the enslaved from womb to grave in the building of a nation, talking about this country. But here's the thing: pound of flesh is a phrase that supposedly was attributed to Shakespeare. And it has to do with a debt that must be repaid even though demanding it may be unreasonable. And that's what bothered me about this is the idea that if we demand uh, reparations, that somehow that's unreasonable to people. And, that's tough. The reality is, I don't care. I don't care if it's unreasonable. It has to be done. That debt has to be paid. But I think we need to better understand the depth of that debt. You say it again. I believe we need to understand the depth of that debt, because otherwise we'll end up settling for far too less than what we should. And I've said this for a long time. We are tasked with collecting that debt. Ain't no getting around that. They can talk all they want about, well, that wasn't me, and that was years ago, and my family didn't ever have no slaves. I don't care about none of that. You all know as well as I do the reality of this. Okay? But I want to share with you some of the things that go into that debt, so we better understand it. I'm going to read you a little something here. Enslaved adults knew very well that the death of their enslavers often meant the breaking up of their families. Talking about the enslaved families. Thus, when Banks, that was a enslaved African. Thus, when Banks was put on the auction block in the summer of 1857, he had a message for his potential buyers. He fought the traders and tried to liberate himself by running away. Quote, I gave them evidence that they had a man to deal with, and I determined now to see how they would treat me as a prisoner, unquote. During interviews with potential buyers, Banks remained defiant by not revealing information about his health and skills because he knew it would affect the monetary value placed on him. Despite these efforts, he recalled being purchased that day for $1,200. Now, that caught my eye because that was the exact amount put on us for this, what they call it, the check. Now, yes, it went out to everybody, supposedly, $1,200. But especially for us, black folks, we looked at what they did with all that cash. They gave out cash by the billions of dollars to everybody else, to the bankers, and the bankers then turned it over to the rich and their friends. And very little, tiny bit trickled down to our communities. $1,200. So it's not that new, huh? But listen to this. When enslaved children entered the world, their birth announcements came in the form of federal records, such as ship manifests. Increase my volume? Okay, let me turn it up there. Thank you, Samuel. Okay, I hope that's better. Okay. Is that better? All right. Now, when enslaved children entered the world, their birth announcements came in the form of federal records, such as ship manifests or private papers, such as business ledgers, bills of sale, or plantation lists of births. Their parents were not showered with gifts to start them on their journey. Instead, announcements consisted of simple statements in public and private papers with notations like Molly's infant born today, or loud pronouncements at auctions such as, look at this fine specimen, will make a good hand. Today's birth announcements look quite different. Included in these formal introductions of a child to friends and loved ones are typically the name, age, date, and time of birth, weight, footprints, and sometimes a picture. Just as contemporary parents look forward to the birth of their children or create a forever home for an adopted child, enslavers noted the birth of enslaved infants. However, rather than record details about the newborn, they appraised them with a monetary value that typically increased as they aged. I'm sharing this because I think it's important that we understand that, and this went on for several hundred years, generation after generation after generation after generation after generation after generation, this devaluing of us. Yeah, and that has a deep psychological toll. But now check this out. While not all dead enslaved people were sold, many were, as were free blacks and poor and marginalized whites. The enslaved body, although no longer enslaved, was still traded, sold, and used after death. In post-mortem spaces, formerly enslaved and free black cadavers were used on a dissection table in the halls of major medical schools and by prominent physicians in the North and the South. Any unclaimed bodies from blacks and whites, poor and marginalized citizens, as well as criminals of all races, were subject to the cadaver trade. Several bodies were at the center of a legal process following a coroner's inquest to determine the cause of death. Anatomy professors justified this practice as being for the benefit of medical knowledge and confirmed that what they were doing was not sacrilege. The demand for hands-on medical research fueled the traffic in dead bodies and served as the lifeblood of the domestic cadaver trade. Now, I doubt very seriously if you ever thought about this or ever heard anything about this, the cadaver trade. So even when we died, they found a way to make money on us. And I often wondered, where are all the graveyards for all the enslaved Africans? Because when you talk about generations of people, we don't have near, and we couldn't get buried in graveyards where they were white people. So where are all the graveyards for black people? I suspect that they were probably, a lot of them were sold, just like we know now about this cadaver trade, and probably buried in unmarked graves, and ain't no telling what else. I'm afraid to wonder. I know they did. Some folks did take our skins and made stuff out of our skins. So, you know. But I'm doing some time traveling here because I want you to understand and feel and see in your mind and feel in your heart what our ancestors went through because of this. When you hear the descendants of slave owners today talking about taking America back, whether you hear it as backwards or whatever you want to hear it as, or when you hear them talking about make America great again, you have to stop and analyze that. Where are they talking about taking us back to, and when was it great to them as opposed to now? You see, because we had advanced to a certain point, And to the folks that are saying make America great again, they're obviously not liking where it is now. They want to take it back somewhere. So where do they want to take it back to? When you listen to the tramp, he's telling you. Well, let's go back a couple of hundred years, just a couple of hundred. Born around 1800, Gilbert Dickey witnessed mother and child separations firsthand. He saw one woman who was chained and handcuffed in the gangs, leaving a child only 9 days old. The child raised by hand, and when a woman nearly grown, she was sold. These recollections confirmed the deep pain that separation and sale caused enslaved people. Betty Kofer of North Carolina remembered seeing some slaves sold away from the plantation. She saw 4 men and 2 women, both of them with little babies. Brothers witnessed their sisters being sold, along with their nieces and nephews. Bill Sims of Missouri remembered seeing his oldest sister sold on the block with her children. His sister was sold for $1,100. A baby in her arms sold for $300. Another sold for $600, and the other for a little less than that. Such recollections tell us a great deal about the monetary value of bodies. I ain't finished. I'm almost finished, though, with this part. This enslaved woman spent her entire life fearing the separation, sale, beatings, and deaths of her children. Even though she tried to maintain family cohesiveness, her enslaved status did not protect her from temporary or permanent separations. For instance, her son Benjamin spent 2 years away from the family working on a vessel in the West Indies with his enslaver. Perhaps to her delight, Benjamin was scheduled to return to the community in which she, his wife, his brother Moses Grandy, and his sister Tamar resided. Grandy was very glad and waited anxiously to see his brother. But just as it happened with his brother, upon Grandy's return from the woods, Benjamin had already been sold. He struggled to relay the news to Mother, so he got a boy to go and tell her. At this point, Mother was blind and very old, and she was unable to go reunite with Benjamin before he was taken away. Once again, Mother grieved after him greatly. She was left to cope with yet another separation through sale. At the end of their lives, some blacks found solace in the certainty of death. One mother who had birthed 11 children preferred death to sale. When they're dead, it seems as if we know they was gone. But when they're sold down south, I don't know where they is, the 62-year-old enslaved mother cried. She was brokenhearted by the separation, which is far worse than death. Time traveling is hard, y'all. Listen to this. As enslavers in training, Southern white youth were raised much differently than the enslaved. They were protected from the exigencies, well, y'all know what I'm talking about, from the exigencies of heavy labor, from the task of heavy labor. And their parents spent time educating and preparing them for adulthood. White parents taught their children about slavery and clearly explained the differences between enslaver and enslaved. Some learned about the institution from bedtime stories and books such as the Child's Book on Slavery or Slavery Made Plain, which sought to educate children about an institution that might seem incomprehensible to a young mind. The book opens with the following explanation. The design of this little book is to show the truth in regard to slavery and to give important information concerning it to all readers who do not already know it well. I included this because we never think about this. Okay? The children were taught differently, of course. We should know this. They were taught totally different than the enslaved children. But what were they taught? See, we just think they were just taught the A's and B's and C's or whatever, reading, writing, arithmetic. No, they were taught specific things about how to properly deal with slavery and slaves. Yeah. And that didn't stop when chattel slavery ended. It didn't stop. That's how come you got young dudes, young white dudes especially, who so easily kill us. And more you're seeing it now, where you see these white women who so easily will kill us, whether it's calling the police and lying, or whether it's pulling guns on black people. Yeah. Huh. All right. How? Let's see. Visual cues, including coffles. Now, coffles is the term that's used for black people who are chained up together. And I did a presentation on coffles. You can go back and look for it in the archives. But visual cues, including coffles, enslaved men, women, and children chained together in an assembly line heading to auctions, also captured these realities. Witnessing a coffle transversing the neighborhood would have made a significant impression on a young person's mind. The sounds of the clanking chains marked the rhythmic cadence of the enslaved on their way to a market. One can imagine the looks on young people's faces as the enslaved people headed to courthouses, town centers, and auction houses. When I was about 7 years old, I witnessed for the first time the sale of a human being, recalled Elizabeth Keckley. Now, the fact that she was able to say human being is interesting because most of them, by the time, they quickly made sure that they did not see us as human beings. But imagine what's in their minds and look at them how they look at us now. Every time I see even a still shot of that police with his knee on brother's neck and with his hand in his pocket, and he's looking up directly in the camera. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, go look that up. It's easy to find. You don't even have to go find the video. Just go look at some stills of it. And look at that man's face. And it tells you everything you need to know about how the ones who exist now, the children and grandchildren of slave owners and slave catchers and all of them, it tells you everything you need to know about him when you look in that dude's face. All right, here we go. Some appraisals and most sales involved a public or private physical inspection in which potential buyers asked enslaved people a series of questions, examined their bodies, and sometimes demanded physical exercise to assess strength and agility. For an example, an enslaved boy in Richmond, Virginia, was placed on the auction block along with other likely men and children, likely meaning that the quality of the enslaved up for sale was good. The setting was described as a long, damp, dirty-looking room with a low, rust-timbered ceiling. Men, many of whom came from surrounding areas, arrived an hour before the bidding began, as agents prepared for the event near the counting room, which was partitioned off for that purpose. In this space, with walls covered in tobacco stains, unweaned children waited for their fate to be determined, along with men and women who were also for sale. Some were humiliated by the excessive touching and fondling involved in their inspections. This particular auction was organized by the firm Dickinson Hill and Company under the condition that all purchases had to be made in cash on time. That meant right now. Enslaved people were stripped naked and carefully examined as horses are. Every part of their body, from their crown to their feet, was rigorously scrutinized. Here's the thing. Auctions, let me take that back. Auctions was such an inhuman process that, to me, any time is that auctions are spoken about or dealt with, they need to be dealt with and spoken about in the what I want to say, in the terribleness that they were. You know, they shouldn't be made light of, and they shouldn't be joked about, and they should not be dismissed as being just a little something. They were among the most inhumane things that human beings could do, to auction off other human beings, men, women, and children, and do it in such a dehumanizing way. You know, it bothers me so much because it has been dismissed. See, to me, how do you take 300 or 400 years and smash it down into, at best, a chapter or two in the educational textbooks that are used in the majority of the schools for the majority of people being taught in America? How do you do that? What that does is it says, oh, it was a minor thing. It wasn't that great. It wasn't that terrible. And then you make sure in the entertainment world, you have plenty of singing and dancing Negroes. Okay? So that the balance is way off. Entertainment gives you tons and tons of entertaining Negroes during slavery. And the textbooks, which are supposed to be the facts and deal with education, give you a tiny, tiny smidgen of what that world was like for the African people. Okay? And then when you look at even just a little bit of the literature, and I call it literature, of the time, when you look at just a little bit of it, let's look at these. They'll go by slow enough, but a Negro wench, 22 years old. She got a child about 9 months old, and it's up to the buyer whether he even wants the child. To be sold and led at public auction. This is 1829. Here's one 1840. Is that 1840 or 49? Okay. Valuable gang of young Negroes. There's that word. 10 likely and valuable slaves at auction. 10 as likely Negroes. Slaves to sell. A Negro man, a Negro woman and child, and 2 female children. I mean, how do you have to detach yourself from this in order to some degree, to function. But I say, like James Baldwin said, to not be angry all the time in America means you're not really functioning as a human being. One of the things about how all of this really, really, really affected us, I want to deal with this basically as I close. Talking about the pound of flesh. And I think I understand better the price we paid for their pound of flesh that they got out of us. But here's where it hurts us the deepest, I think. Colonial laws regarding statutory rape were not applied to blacks and Indians, Native Americans. Native Americans and blacks, as well as their children, were prohibited by law from defending themselves against abuse, sexual and otherwise, at the hands of whites. A slave who defended herself against the attack of a white person was subject to cruel beatings by either the master or the mistress. Liaisons, sex between whites and blacks or Native Americans were illegal. The females of color received the harshest punishment if discovered in a liaison with a white male. In other words, if a white male was caught having sex with a black woman or a Native American, the woman would be the one that would be charged. Okay? Females of color, regardless of their young age, were viewed as seducers of white men. You know, that's what they claim the deal was with Sally Hemings, with Jefferson, and it was claimed by a lot of them. In fact, they claim it to this day. They'll say, well, that little black girl, she was so, what do they call it, advanced for her age. She seduced me. That's why I had sex with a 10-year-old child. Pregnancy became the evidence of the illegal liaison. A mulatto baby, the indicator of the race of the father, white male. The child, by statute, took the status of the mother and was thus born into slavery. Understand this. So the white man rapes a black woman, she gets pregnant, the baby then takes the status of the mother, and if the mother's a slave, then the child is born into slavery as a slave. The full benefit of the relationship and the offspring went to the white male. See, under English precedent, the status of children was determined by the father. But here in the United States, the colonists changed the law to increase the wealth and domination of the white master, who had eliminated certain costs of purchasing human labor by becoming a breeder of slaves. You see, the black female, woman, or child was forced into sexual relationships for the white slave master, slave owner's pleasure and profit. Because now he has sex at his will, and if a pregnancy results from it, that baby now becomes his property, which he can do whatever he wants. He can sell that child. See, and I always say this, the number one deadbeat dads in the world were slave owners, white slave owners. The psychological effects of slavery are still affecting black women today. Black women during slavery were violated, raped, watched their children sold off, and were told constantly that they were property. They were owned by their white slave owners. They were forced to mate with different black males just for the sake of procreation, without love relationships being involved. Today, many sisters still believe and internalize the ideology of my self-worth is tied to my body. Yeah, think about it. Enslaved African women were placed on auction blocks nude. Caucasian buyers grabbed at their breasts, their buttocks, and vaginas to test the quality of the merchandise. This procedure is still to some degree carried out in strip clubs. Yeah. There's even a stage that resembles an auction block. And in many strip clubs, the men are able to feel and touch and caress the merchandise for as little as $10, or in many cases for $1. Video vixens and strippers are one and the same. These beautiful black women are still on the auction block without a clue on how to get down. I didn't know this for many years, and I have, to this day, still never been to a strip club, even though when I moved down south to Atlanta and lived there for 10 years, I was amazed at how many strip clubs, although they call them booty shake clubs, there were in the South, black booty shake clubs. And I was even dumbfounded by how many so-called pastors or preachers or ministers, black men, they seem like every brother was part-time job was as a minister, a pastor, or a preacher. But how many of them went to strip clubs, to booty shake clubs to have meetings? Yeah, they would have a meeting at the booty shake club at lunchtime. I said, what kind of crap is this? But that's a lot of them did that. But here's what got me. I did not know for many years that the strip club operates like this. The women pay to strip. They pay for their time on the pole. Now, some of y'all probably know this. I did not know this. It's like a woman, say for men, we go to a barber shop. The brother that's the barber, if he's not the owner, he's paying a rent for the use of that chair in that space. So he pays a weekly rent to the owner. Okay? Well, the strip clubs are just like that. The women pay for the time on the pole. They get the tips, and they have to pay the rent time on the pole. And I was like, whoa. Now, that's when I really understood why the gangsters, the mob, and why them dudes own the clubs. Because that ain't nothing but straight up pimping. I'm gonna lease you some time on the pole. You get out there and strip and dance and do whatever, get them tips and pay me my money. And if you don't make enough, then you owe me. And then I can tell you to do some other things to make my money. Get out there and get my money. Is that not sick? In any case, let me get off of that subject. Anyway, the highest cost to black people in my mind of slavery and the after effects of slavery has been the cost to black people for black women, because black women have had to bear having children by rape, having children by love. They went through centuries of having them sold off. They would run off. And to a certain extent, some of us as black men, we held this against black women. We need to have what I call a dual forgiveness, because on the one hand, some black men hold it against black women in general, saying y'all should not have allowed them to rape you, as if that makes any sense. But some black women hold it against black men for not protecting them against the rape. And where it really became problematic was when black women were raped and they became pregnant and they bore children of the slave owners. If they weren't sold off, they had to raise those children as their children because they bore them as their children. And many black men became the surrogates of the slave owners' children. That creates some serious psychological stuff going on, that we are still suffering through that today because we have never had it repaired. That's part of reparations. That's part of reparations, to heal the psychological damage that was done to us. And so I just want to close out today saying, if you're a black man, I think it's always necessary that if you're in a relationship with the black woman, that you hold her to you sometimes. Just say, I love you, I cherish you. And that part of me that needs to say, please forgive me, my ancestors. Forgive me, forgive my ancestors. And black women, you should do the same with your man, so that we can heal ourselves as much as we can, and understand what we went through, what we have been through. Yeah. I close as always with what I always say: no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.